Everybody knows Woody Johnson's a problem for the Jets. Everybody also knows it's very unlikely he's going to sell the team anytime soon. But has an opportunity presented itself for the Jets to rid themselves of Woody? Let's explore it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, November 13th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thank you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel because new customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, today on the show, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try to do a mailbag with listener questions. Thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Let's begin with a question from Michael. Michael writes, John, like you, I'm a longtime Jets fan. I remember watching Super Bowl III. I took my then 16-year-old son to the last Jets playoff game on a very cold Sunday night in Pittsburgh in January 2011. He's now 30 years old, and we've yet to see another Jets playoff game. The presidential election is over, and the results may mean that Woody Johnson returns to the United Kingdom as ambassador. If and when this happens, we can anticipate that Chris Johnson will once again take over the reins. The last time this happened, the Jets organization did not exactly experience an improvement. If this occurs again, how do you think this will play out? So that's a great question by Michael. It's obviously something in the news, a new administration coming in January, and lots of speculation that Woody Johnson could end up working in it. A lot of people think he's automatically going back to the UK as an ambassador. That's not a guarantee. I mean, he could end up being appointed as an ambassador to another country. He could end up with a different sort of job in the new administration. We don't really know yet. And it's not imminent. The new administration does not take office until January. And even then, there's a process for people to take over jobs. So it is probably going to be a fairly lengthy process. It could take months. So all this is to say that any departure for Woody Johnson is likely in the distant future, if it happens at all. As Michael noted, all signs are Chris Johnson, Woody's brother, would take over the team again. Look, I think we've seen this before. I think we've seen how this plays out. It did not lead to an improvement last time. If you're looking for a silver lining, what I would say is that it felt like Chris Johnson became a little bit more humbled near the end of his tenure running the Jets, right before Woody Johnson returned to the States. But you have to remember, Chris Johnson was the guy who hired Adam Gase. And the famous quote that he gave was, I'm not trying to win Twitter, I'm trying to win football games. Well, he ended up winning neither. Chris Johnson was also the guy who, in January of 2019, claimed Mike Maccagnan was a good GM. He was the right guy for the team. He then allowed Maccagnan to spend what was a record amount of money in a single free agency in the offseason of 2019. He let Mike Maccagnan run the draft in 2019. Then weeks later declared Mike Maccagnan the wrong GM for this team. So Chris Johnson's very erratic. Chris Johnson was more erratic than Woody, at least prior to 2017. I think prior to 2017, Woody was pretty predictable. He was stupid. He made a lot of awful decisions, but you could predict them coming. Woody has become less predictable since he returned from the UK. He's really made some very impulsive decisions. I think right now the Jets organization is in chaos. And the most important thing for the Jets heading into this offseason will be to hire a GM and a head coach who will end the chaos. I don't think Woody Johnson's potentially imminent departure helps with that, because a lot of coaches and general manager, the candidates for those jobs, the most important thing that they look for in an organization is ownership stability, because that's the guy you're working for. It's not a good cap situation. The cap's not that hard to clear out. It takes a year or two. If you just have a reset year or two, your cap situation will be fine no matter who you are. It's not a lot of talent existing on the roster. If I'm a GM, I'm saying I'm going to get better talent. If I'm a coach, I'm saying I'm going to coach the talent up. I think you understand that as a new coach or a new general manager, the reason the job is open is usually because the team wasn't very good to begin with. You're usually inheriting a pretty bad situation roster-wise and or cap-wise. What you need, though, is an owner who's going to allow you to implement your vision, an owner who's not going to step on your toes, an owner who's not going to intervene at points where it's unhelpful. And Woody Johnson's shown he's the opposite of that this year. I mean, it's not just that he fired Robert Saleh. It's that it feels like he fired Robert Saleh on an impulse. It feels like he fired Robert Saleh because fans on Twitter said fire Saleh. It doesn't feel like he consulted with anybody. It doesn't feel like he considered any of the potential ramifications for the move. And, it's not, this isn't saying that Saleh was a good coach. It's not saying Saleh did not deserve to be fired, but you need a plan going forward. And Woody Johnson did not have that. So you see this impulsiveness with ownership, whether it's, firing Saleh 5 games into the season, whether it's, letting McCagnon run an offseason and then firing him. There's just utter chaos. And those are just 2 examples of the chaos that exists within the Jets organization. How many personnel moves does Woody Johnson dictate? Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers, Tim Tebow, Brett Favre all the way back. Woody's not going to let you run the team the way you want to. And I think that Woody leaving actually adds an additional layer of chaos, an additional obstacle to the Jets as they conduct these searches, because Woody's going to be the guy making the hires, and then he's out of there. And then so essentially you're working, one guy hires you, and then you're working for somebody else. You're the new guy, you had nothing to do with you being hired, and now you report to him. I mean, is that a situation that sounds tenable? I'm going to say something here that might be a little controversial that people may not like. Back in 2017, there was some criticism Woody Johnson received for leaving the team to become the ambassador to the UK. I did not think that criticism was fair. I think once in a lifetime opportunity to serve your country, work as an ambassador. I don't think it's fair to criticize people. Dan Rooney, the great owner of the Steelers, did that. This is now not a once in a lifetime opportunity. This would be the second time this happens. And if Woody wants to take that job, if Woody feels that, he wants to serve the country again, fine. I respect that. But at a certain point, when you are leaving your team for the second time in 8 years, I think it's fair to ask, is this team a priority for you? Again, if you want to leave, fine. But this is a really important, this running this team is a really important thing. This cannot be a plaything for you. You can sell the team. You want to work, you want to go work in the government, fine. But you can't keep neglecting the team. Or maybe it's better for the Jets if Woody neglects the team. My point is that it feels like this is just a hobby for Woody at this point. And this is $1 billion enterprise. This is an NFL team, starving with a fan base, starving for quality play, and you're leaving it now. Again, maybe that's a good thing considering it's Woody Johnson, but I think this speaks to some of the issues. I think this is kind of a microcosm of a lot of the issues the Jets have, where the owner just doesn't take it seriously. The owner drops in at random points when he feels like it, and then imposes nonsensical orders, and it completely messes everything up. If you want to go, this is the second time in 8 years you're doing this. If you're leaving this team for the second time in 8 years, I think at some point it's fair to question how committed you are, or whether you're a guy who just, like, in your spare time, you just decide to go in and mess everything up. How will it work with Chris Johnson? I mean, if you're looking for some sort of silver lining, it did feel like Chris Johnson maybe became a little bit more humble after his Adam Gase gambit failed, and after he saw what a mess he created by letting McCagnon run that offseason. I will say this: the search that resulted in the hiring of Robert Saleh did not work out in the end, but it was like a normal NFL search. You can run a decent search. You can have a decent search process and just miss on your hire. In 2019, when they hired Adam Gase, it was a dysfunctional search process where very few of the candidates they interviewed were good candidates, and it felt like Johnson was really kind of erratic then. In 2021, he deferred to the general manager, which is a good thing. It did not work out, but if you run the search well and it doesn't work out, you can live with that, because sometimes you just hire the wrong guy. Sometimes you hire a guy who looks qualified and just isn't the right guy. So I guess from that standpoint, the 2021 coaching search that Chris Johnson ran was much more professional than the 2019 search, even if the results really weren't that much better. So maybe if Chris Johnson's learned so much, why hasn't he stopped his brother from doing this crazy stuff over the last couple of years? I mean, I think the Jets, I hate to say it, I feel like we're almost waiting for the Johnson family to sell. And I don't know, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but that's the way I feel, because this family has no idea how to run a team. And I think it's tough to have hope, because we saw Chris Johnson last time. It's not like he was any better. So I wish I could give you a better, more optimistic answer, but I'm afraid that is my answer. That here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue looking to the future, maybe a more positive note, because there actually are a couple players this team can build around moving forward, which is a change from the last couple GM and coaching searches this team had. We'll talk about who those players might be as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So if you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you don't have to wait till the game starts to place a bet. You can put money down on the Jets and Colts this weekend. Somehow the Jets are favorites, so if you think the Jets are going to win, you can put money down on them. If you don't think the Jets are going to win, maybe you want to bet the Colts. Either way, you get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet on FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup on Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you, everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue with our weekly mailbag. Our next question. John, I have been a fan of the Jets since the late 80s. I've seen a lot of bad Jets teams and horrible losses, but I feel like this is the worst Jets team I've ever watched. The 1996 Jets, coached by Rich Kotite, put up a better fight. We know there will probably be a new coach and GM. As far as a rebuild goes, which players on the current roster do you think the Jets should build around? Well, I think if you're looking for a silver lining, this is different from the situation in 2019 when the Jets fired Mike McCagnon. It's different from the situation in 2014 when the Jets fired John Idzik. It's even different from the situation in 2012 when the Jets fired Mike Tannenbaum, because there's actually like a pretty decent core of players entering their prime on this roster right now. Now, you might not be able to tell it based on the team's performance this year, but this is not a team completely lacking in talent. You know, in 2019, the Jets really had nothing on the roster. In 2014, the Jets really had nothing on the roster. In 2012, they did have a couple players, but that was like the end of their careers. DeBrickashaw, Ferguson, Nick Mangold, David Harris. You could tell they were near the end, so there wasn't a lot of hope there. The Jets still do have the 2022 draft class. Garrett Wilson, who's quietly, he's been, it's been an up and down season for him, but overall, I think it's been a pretty productive season for him. Breece Hall may not be the guy that we hoped he would be. He may not be that top 5, top 3 back that we dreamed he'd be when the Jets drafted him out of Iowa State, or even a year ago, we were hoping maybe he'd improve with better blocking up front. But he's still a good back. Jermaine Johnson's got to recover from an injury, but he's a solid player. Michael Carter II's an excellent slot corner. And Sauce Gardner, who I'm a little worried about Sauce because I can't really pinpoint what's going wrong with him right now. Now, look, we know he can't tackle. He never tackled his first 2 years either. So I don't think his lack of tackling ability is as big of a deal as people are making it out to be, because when you play the corner position, you're there to shut down other teams' receivers. And Sauce Gardner did that as well as anybody his first 2 years in the NFL. This year, he's taken a step back. So I'm actually a little worried about this. I want to get to the bottom of what's going on with him. Is it just he's having an off year? Is it just the team's overall dysfunction is kind of dragging him down? Is it a case where maybe his head got a little too big? I don't know. I worry about that a little bit. I'm hoping it's just an off season, but if Sauce Gardner plays to his potential, he's one of the few shut down corners in the NFL. I keep hearing the phrase overrated being thrown around with Sauce Gardner. Well, to me, overrated means that you never deserve the accolades to begin with. And I don't think that that's true of Sauce Gardner. I think if you watch his first 2 seasons, he played at a much higher level than he is this year. Now, this year, he's not playing that well. But the point is, people talk about, do we trade these players? Well, it's the old, you ever see the first season of Family Guy, the old Peter Griffin scene where he has a choice. He can either choose a boat or a mystery box, and he ends up choosing the box because he wants a boat, and The mystery box could be anything, even a boat. So he passes up the boat for the mystery box. It was a really funny scene. When you trade like these young players in their prime, that's what that reminds me of. It's like we're trading these good players to get draft picks, and those draft picks could be turned into good players. You know, obviously there are points where it makes sense to trade players for draft picks. And look, I'm a big fan of getting extra draft picks. I think the Jets should have traded a lot of their guys who aren't going to be here next year at the deadline for draft picks. I think the Jets should have been sellers. I think not being a seller was a mistake at the trade deadline. I blame ownership for that because I think any objective view of the Jets at the point we reached the trade deadline was that the season was going nowhere, and that the older guys, guys who aren't going to be here next year, like Devontae Adams, quite frankly, Hassan Reddick, even DJ Reed, maybe Tyler Conklin, those are guys they probably should have sent out the door because they're not going to help the team going forward, and you get extra draft picks for them. But I'm a believer that you don't tear it down. I mean, when does tanking ever work in the NFL? It's not, every team that's ever tanked they've never built its championship team. It's not like the NBA where there's only 5 players on the court at a time. In the NFL, you have 12 starters. You have 22 starters, 11 starters on either side of the ball. So, getting rid of your good players, that just digs you a deeper hole because any guy you get rid of, you have to replace. I would build around these guys. I mean, I think you have a bunch of guys who are about to hit their second contracts who are, good players, and it's at least a base of talent. Like the next year or two, the Jets are going to have to reset. That's all there is to it. I throw, and even though he's older, I throw Quinnen Williams into the mix. Quinnen Williams still has a lot of good years in front of him, I think. And if you build around these guys, you fill the pieces around them, and you have a couple of good drafts. I mean, it's not as hard to turn around as you think it is. It's not as hard to turn it around as the Jets make it out to be. It's just it requires you to build around the pieces you've got. So those are the guys I'd build around, and I think the Jets, for all of the troubles this team has and for all the frustrations, it has a pretty decent young core, and that's part of what's frustrating is that they, instead of building around this young core, they tried to cut corners by adding Aaron Rodgers and all of his friends. If they had done things the right way, this could be a really good team right now. Our next question, John. We've suffered through losing. We've suffered through bad teams. We've suffered through failed expectations. This team seems different. We are terrible, yet I see guys celebrating when we are down. We have players fighting with fans. We can't stop telling the media how good we are. Is this the most unlikable team you can remember? I think it is. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a Jets team I've liked less than this team. And I think part of it goes back to just like the lack of equity these players have with the fan base. Like if Aaron Rodgers was having the season with Green Bay, the fans would forgive him because he gave the fans a lot of good memories. I think that if you lose, you want there to be a greater purpose to your team losing. It's like if you're rebuilding, you're like, okay, fine, we're losing, but we're getting young players experience. We're getting a draft pick in here. If you go to the second round of the playoffs as a young team, you'll say, okay, this is a building. We lost this game, but this is a building block going forward. This is an all-in team. And the thing about going all in, everybody kept, people kept celebrating the all in like it was a genius move, like it was like the greatest thing you could do. Well, when you go all in and lose, you lose everything. And the Jets have lost everything. And it's not just that they've lost everything, it's that they've lost everything with a bunch of, these are a bunch of guys who are here for a paycheck. They don't care about the Jets. They don't care about the fans. You tell me Hassan Reddick is a guy who really cares that this team's losing right now? I don't think so. And beyond that, it almost feels like the organization's dysfunction is like impacting the younger players. It feels like the younger players are kind of getting trapped in the dysfunction, being pulled down by it, like Sauce Gardner. It's just a mess right now. I mean, there's no greater purpose to this team losing. I guess they're getting a higher draft pick, but this was supposed to be a team that went all in and won, and this team's going nowhere. They're not building to anything bigger. They don't have players who you've come to know and love through the years who you can forgive this performance from. And I think it's a very subjective thing. Is this the most unlikable team? But I mean, I think that, I think for me it is. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to go back to talking about the concept of tanking. I just mentioned it a little bit, but we're going to go into more details about why it really doesn't work that much, but why winning games at this point doesn't really help the team that much. If those things sound contradictory, they're not. I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday Mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Hey, Jets fans, remember our great partner, Ultimate Pro Football GM? Well, they're back, and they've added an amazing new game mode I need to tell you about. This game has you step into the shoes of a football franchise general manager and lead it to glory. And now it has a new head coach career mode. So on top of getting to build your dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring coaching staffs, you'll now get to call offensive plays during games as well. Additionally, you'll dig into new tools you can work with, such as individual training camps and upgraded negotiation systems. So this fun and realistic game just got a lot better. If you've already got it installed, be sure to do an update so you can try out the new mode. If you don't have it yet, download it right now. It's a must-have for all football fans. I know you'll love it. Ultimate Pro Football GM is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. And here's a special offer for Locked On fans. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. Make sure to get it, as this perk will jumpstart your play and give you the advantage you'll want in creating a dynasty. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Let's continue. Our next question is from Taylor. Hey, John, I know your general distaste for the concept of tanking, but do you not think the single best strategy the Jets could adopt at this point is tanking? I do fear that Rodgers putting together a garbage time winning streak might be enough to convince the owner that just a few more tweaks are needed, when clearly this entire experiment needs to be torn down. So the thing with tanking is that usually it's done in order to get a better draft pick. And I think that history shows us that it's just not very effective. And for reasons I just talked about in the second segment, is that, in the NFL, even a quarterback can only do so much. You're never really one player away in the NFL. And tearing down your roster, when you get rid of good players on your roster, even for a bad team, it just digs your hole deeper. It means any player you get rid of has to be replaced. So it just makes life much more difficult. Easier to tank in the NBA where there's only 5 guys. You get rid of one guy, it's not that hard to. You don't really need to replace as much. In the NFL, you have 22 starters, so it's tougher. And look at the teams that have tanked. I mean, Cleveland, that 2-year stretch where they won one game, they've won one playoff game since then. Jacksonville the year with Trevor Lawrence, that's not going very well for them. You can go down the list. There really aren't many teams that have effectively tanked. Miami, how about the Miami Dolphins? They tore everything down in 2019. They haven't won a playoff game since. So tanking to try and build your team up, it just doesn't work. I mean, there are a lot of examples of it not working, very few examples of it working. But I think what Taylor's hitting on is actually something significant. Winning at this point of the year doesn't necessarily help your team out. In some ways, it hurts it because it camouflages some of your issues. Perfect example of the Jets last year, who won 2 of their last 3 games. That kind of like tricked the ownership into thinking the team was better than it really was, because it allowed the ownership to say, well, we won 7 games without Aaron Rodgers. Now, I think any objective appraisal of the Jets in 2023 would conclude that was a very bad football team. They were one of 3 teams in the AFC that was out of the playoff race with 3 weeks left to go in the season. And then what happened? They barely skated by the team drafting second in the NFL draft and the team drafting third in the NFL draft. They barely skated by 2 of the 3 worst teams in the NFL. And they started pounding their chest. We won 7 games. Yeah, you won 7 games, but not because you're a good football team. And there were also like a lot of really fluky things that happened in some of their wins early in that season. So I think from the standpoint that, wins, so from the standpoint you can fool yourself into thinking your team's better than it really is, wins don't really help you at this point. So I think that's different from tanking. I think tanking means you're just trying to get a better draft pick. I think at this point, look, this comes down to whether you're rooting for the Jets or not. And look, I can't tell you what to do at this point of the year. I don't think losing games for a better draft position really helps you all that much, because if you look at any given year, the difference between the quality of player you draft at 5 and the difference between the quality of player you draft at 9 is really not that big. But I've seen this over and over with the Jets, where they go on this late season winning streak and they read way too much into it. And I do think that's a danger. So does that mean you root against the Jets? I mean, I can't tell you what to do, but I do think there is danger in the Jets going on a winning streak here, and maybe it convinces ownership that this Rodgers thing could work out. So I do share that concern. I think that is something worth keeping an eye on, because this experiment has clearly failed, and there's really no argument to be made for the Jets running this back one more year. But I don't trust ownership to realize that if the Jets go on a late season winning streak and pile up some cosmetic wins. Our next question: McCagnon and Gase were horrific, but there was a 7-9 season. Were they that much worse than JD and Saleh? I mean, they were worse. I don't think they were that much worse. As I mentioned, I think Douglas will leave behind a better base of talent than McCagnon did. And I think, I think Saleh was more respected in the locker room than Gase. I think they're both better. I don't think they're that much better, though. I mean, the record speaks for itself. This is a dismal record. This team has not had a winning season under Joe Douglas. The team never had a winning season under Robert Saleh. They were both pretty bad at the end of the day. Next question. John, in the Saleh Ulbrich administration, the Jets are now 2-5 in road games against the AFC and NFC West and games in Europe. They are also 2-7 in games with extended rest. The only long-distance road games they won in the last 2 years were against those terrible Broncos teams, and the extended rest wins were last year against the awful Giants and Patriots. There also seems to be a theme every week, no matter the opponent, of getting off to a slow start. I know it's hard to pinpoint the problem without being in the locker room, but what do you think has gone wrong? I know there's some thought that the Jets' offensive and defensive systems are overly simplistic. Could this be the problem? I don't think that the defense is too simplistic, because this same defensive system was very successful the last couple of years. I think the offense is outdated. I think that they've leaned into practices that are not modern. When you talk about some of the formations that they use, when you talk about some of the strategies that they use, play calling wise, it's clear this team does not really value analytics very highly. But I think the issues that you spoke to in that question are just broader questions of the quality of the coaching staff. Because to me, one of the tests of a good coaching staff is how do you do with extra rest? Because you have extra days to scout out the next opponent. You have extra days to exploit their weaknesses, but you also have extra days to scout yourself. You also have extra days to figure out what's going wrong. What are the things we can improve on? And how many times do you see the Jets improve on the things that they're weak coming out of a bye or coming out of a long week? Very rarely do. I think this just speaks to the overall poor quality of the coaches the Jets have between Saleh and Ulbrich. I think it's that simple. I mean, can I pinpoint it? No. It's tough to articulate. It's tough to find, but you just see it on the field, and it's just not good enough. So I think that the overall record on long rest in particular is a sign that this coaching staff just is not very good. And I think it's pretty obvious. I think the record bears that out. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.